A four-game night in the NBA with plenty of topics to discuss. Are the Cavs legit title contenders? Who would you rather be between the Hawks and the Chicago Bulls? And can James Harden really lift the Clippers?
When that final buzzer rings, you know it's time for Locked On NBA Game Night. All the post-game reactions to every game across the league, every single night, with insights only the hosts at Locked On can provide. It's the true NBA fans' one stop for all the action. Every game, every night. It's Locked On NBA Game Night. Tipping off now.
Let's get it going on Locked On NBA Game Night. I'm your host, Rylan Stiles. Joining me today is Jackson Gatlin. I host Locked On Thunder. He hosts Locked On Rockets. After we tangoed on Friday, Jackson, the NBA was right back to it on Saturday. Only 4 games. That was a bit of a downer. But other than that, how was your Saturday?
My Saturday was fantastic. We had some interesting finishes to some of these 4 games that we're getting ready to talk about here in the show. And yes, our two teams did tango on Friday. And much like the preseason matchup between these two teams, the Thunder just looked completely outclassed the Rockets in that one. But that was the thing for the Friday night crew to talk about.
And in this Saturday, I would say it's for the NBA sickos. Like, there was no marquee, just absolutely star-studded game on the slate. But there was a game that stood out above the rest, and that was the Cleveland Cavaliers remaining undefeated. We take you out to Cleveland right now with Danny Cunningham.
Danny Cunningham here at Rocket Mortgage Fieldhouse after the Cavs beat the Brooklyn Nets 105-100. Cavs moved to 11-0 on the season. This was, I think, the ugliest game the Cavs have played. It was also the grittiest win the Cavs have so far this season. Cavs didn't play well after the first quarter, had maybe their worst quarter of the year in the third quarter, and then they went really small in the fourth quarter. It was a great adjustment by head coach Kenny Atkinson. The closing lineup tonight was Donovan Mitchell, Darius Garland, Ty Jerome, Karis LeVert, and Evan Mobley. And that group really turned things around after the Cavs were trailing by double figures. It was an awesome finish on both ends of the floor. Evan Mobley was fantastic, both offensively and defensively. Darius Garland, I thought, did a lot of really good things down the stretch. And now the Cavs are going to be a team that has a target on their back. They're 11-0. They'll try and get to 12-0 on Monday night in Chicago. We'll see if they can.
So we'll start with this, Jackson. He mentioned the target on his back, but he also mentioned this was the grittiest win of the season. I would have to agree with that. I think this was one of their best wins because while the Nets are not one of the best teams they've beaten in terms of like prestige and record and things of that nature, after just trouncing the Golden State Warriors on Friday, to come back and get down in the second night of a back-to-back, how often in the NBA do we discuss schedule losses and discuss, oh, it's just not our night, we'll try again next time, that's why you play 82, to persevere through that slow start and come out the other side in a game that you really had to fight for all the way down the stretch, I thought was impressive, and it really kind of defines this gritty Cavs season.
No, fully agree with you there, Rylan. I mean, look, coming off that huge win against Golden State, right? Think of the emotional high that you're on when you keep the win streak going. This is like one of the greatest starts in franchise history, and you have all this, right? And then you walk into a game against the Nets, a team that on paper you're supposed to be like head and shoulders better than, and you struggle. You struggle for a majority of the game, right? At any point, the Cavs could have just, given up. They could have, tucked their tail between their legs and been like, you know what, fine, off shooting night. We had a terrible third quarter. They managed to only put up 13 points in that third quarter, just 5 of 18 shooting overall. The offense just completely falling out from under them. The Nets continue to shoot lights out in that frame, 5 of 11 from long distance. It just pouring it on, right? And instead of just wilting and, saying, you know what, all right, fine, we'll take our first loss of the season, whatever, they responded in a really big way in that fourth quarter. You saw them get back to a lot of the things that what makes this Cavs team so unique, right? Their ability to defend at a high level. Danny highlighted their ability to go small, right? When you put Evan Mobley at that 5 spot and then kind of put the guards and wings around him, it worked, right? Evan Mobley's such a versatile defender that you're able to kind of, even though he's not small, you're able to put him at the 5 and then go small. And you have a much more versatile kind of switchy defensive scheme to be able to throw out there.
Yeah, I think that Cleveland, they've obviously been impressive record-wise, but they've also been impressive on the court. And you can kind of look at this team as it's the same really roster from a year ago and think that that's kind of all they are. But the coaching change, I think, is huge for them. You're seeing them lean into more like you're talking about of playing smaller-ish, but Mobley at the 5 is something that they should explore more of. All of last year, they actually are exploring it more this year. And you just see the way the NBA is going. If you can play Mobley at the 5 around the rim, and then you can have 4 really good perimeter defenders, you can absolutely swarm teams. It's how Oklahoma City is very successful. But the other part of his takeaway was that the target is now on their back. And so, first and foremost, on the hot seat, Jackson, are the Cavs legit? And when do you think things start getting chippy? Like, when do you think that a team comes in on a night that they're playing the Cavs and says, you know what, you're the talk of the NBA town. We're going to really go hard at you tonight, trying to prove that we're just simply better.
Is it weird to say that I think that started 2 nights ago or 3 nights ago, whatever, like that? The barometer for this Cavs team was that Warriors game, right? Those were 2 of the best teams in the NBA going head to head. And the Cavs won convincingly in that game. So to me, I think that the target has already been on the back of the Cavaliers for a few games now. And honestly, I mean, again, I think that when you look at the landscape of the Eastern Conference, right, nobody had the Cavaliers pegged as a team that was going to be this good coming out of the gate. You know, everybody had all eyes on, you know, the Celtics as defending champions, the Knicks with their offseason moves, the Philadelphia 76ers who are off to an atrocious start this season due to so many different, you know, injury factors and just chemistry, and it's all over the place in Philly right now. But I think you absolutely have to look at Cleveland as a legit contender, and a lot of credit has to be given to Kenny Atkinson, because as you alluded to, right, this is largely the exact same Cavs team as last season. In fact, they're actually they haven't been fully healthy yet. They're still missing Max Strus, who, you know, at least projects to be a big part of what they want to be able to do this season. I've loved what they've been able to put together this year. Kenny Atkinson has this team playing some incredible basketball, especially on the offensive end. And I think a big part of that, especially like in a game like this, one thing that I've noticed that I really enjoy is, you know, you have a star player in Donovan Mitchell, right? He's clearly the Cavs' go-to number 1 option, everything, but he's not afraid to let, you know, Darius Garland steer the bus, drive the boat, whatever. I'm getting all my analogies mixed up here at the end, but right, Darius Garland was huge down the stretch of this game. He had 8 points in that 4th quarter. He was able to he was an instrumental part of their comeback, putting it right over the top, had a pair of back-to-back buckets, and then after his back-to-back buckets late in the 4th quarter, facilitated a dime to Evan Mobley under the basket, collapsed the defense, just making all the right reads and decisions. And sometimes you have a star player who wants the ball in their hands, right? You wouldn't have a star player like Donovan Mitchell who's like, okay, no, you've got it going. Cool. I'm going to go space the floor. You take over. I'm going to let you run the ship here. And that was a really cool kind of thing to see in this game when the going got tough.
Am I too ahead of my skis here, Jackson, in saying that right now I would project the Cavs Celtics Eastern Conference Finals, because I just look at what it takes to win in the playoffs. And I know that the Knicks have more overall talent, I think it's safe to say. But it takes camaraderie, it takes chemistry, and it takes a battle. And these guys have been through wars together. And you see that selflessness, and the Knicks, I think, will figure it out as the season goes along. I think that was the popular pick in the preseason, and by no means should you jump ship on any take you had 10 games into the year. But you look at this Cavs team, and they have the making of something special, like, because these special runs that are unexpected and that these fan bases always remember. Whatever fan base that you're a part of, you can think back to a run that was not projected at this time of the season for your team. Those all stem from teams that celebrate one another and teams that play together the way this Cavs team does. And I just cannot get over the difference making there is in coaching for this Cavs team, and how much I trust their coaching staff in a playoff series more. So if all health is being equal, I could see a world in which New York, who's more talented, falters a little bit because they're just not on the same page yet after bringing in such a massive new part of their team so late into the offseason.
Well, what the Cavs have is they can throw a haymaker at you, right? They can play 2 very distinctly different styles. They can play big with their 2 front court partners with Evan Mobley and Jarrett Allen, right? Their starting lineup, or they can downsize, right? They can go small, and that's a really strong counter to be able to have if you're head coach Kenny Atkinson. So they can throw multiple different looks at you while still keeping a majority of, if not, all of their best players on the floor. A team like New York, right? If they go small, if you want to pull Karl-Anthony Towns off the floor, right, you're losing one of your biggest weapons. So they might not have like a haymaker to kind of pull out like the Cavs do. My one reservation for them, and this is what we'll see as the season progresses, and ultimately we'll see it in a playoff series, is, they are a very small team outside of Evan Mobley and Jarrett Allen there in the middle. And that's one of the reasons that they've been able to get away with being smaller with their guards on the perimeter, some of their wings, right, being maybe a little undersized, if you will. How does that hold up if they routinely go back to Evan Mobley at the 5 and go small 1 through 4, right? Do they have the necessary size on the wings, the defensive potential on the wings to be able to, kind of hold down that lineup? Because again, Evan Mobley, Jared Allen, when you got those two guys backing you up, you're able to clean up a lot of mistakes that happen on the perimeter or a lot of defensive lapses, or if guys are getting targeted on the perimeter, then they have to deal with those two guys on the back line. So we'll see.
Yeah, I would have to agree. The reservation for me would be from getting to the playoffs, and then you're just able to pick on Garland over and over and over again. And there's not much that Cleveland can do to avoid that, because if you do switch those pick and rolls, then you have Allen or Mobley out on an island. While Mobley's not terrible, Allen certainly is on the perimeter. Then you're kind of in a compromised position either way. So I would have some reservations about that. But I think if you were power ranking the East compared to September, the Cavs have certainly jumped up the leaderboards of teams that you would want to see go far in the playoffs. And I want to give a shout out to the Nets, though. The Nets are losing and they're tanking and they don't have a great record, but they are so fun to watch, and they really push all these teams.
What are they doing? Like they
made what they should be tanking.
They made the trade for Mikal Bridges, and everyone was like, "Okay, cool, the Nets. We'll see you in the Cooper flag race, right?" And they hit this ground running this season, and they're a little competitive, right? They're kind of feisty. They're in some of these games, and I just don't know when they're actually going to pull the plug and be like, "All right, fine, we're gonna trade off all these vets, fire sale, and we'll actually bottom out now." I don't know what's going on with Brooklyn.
Yeah, Brooklyn is in a weird spot because they're in all these games, and you want to be in these games. Even as a tanking team, you want to get whatever experience you can for guys like Cam Thomas in crucial moments, and pushing Denver to the limit and pushing the teams that they have to like the Cavs tonight to the limit is good for that young core. But in the East, this is a whole different conversation, because you look around the league and you see what Milwaukee's doing, you see what Philadelphia's doing with injuries, and you already didn't have a very strong bottom of the East in terms of the play-in picture. And Orlando's hurt now. Where does that slide them once Paolo eventually does return? You could almost get there by default. I don't think that they will, but you could almost just stumble yourself into a play-in tournament, which would not be the best thing for Brooklyn in a year that is so loaded draft-wise. But I'll give them credit, though. No matter if they get Cooper Flag or not, this team is fun to watch night in and night out, which for a season that you felt was lost in September, pretty decent outcome for them. But coming up, Jackson, would you rather be the Atlanta Hawks or the Chicago Bulls long-term and this season? But first, I want to say right now, but our good friends over at Betterhelp. Go check out Betterhelp today, because, Jackson, I'm sure you've been in the same predicament. There's so many times that I think I could really use the benefits of therapy, but I talk myself out of it because I just don't have time to go to a brick and mortar building, find a local therapist, and take time out of my day to go get that done. Where BetterHelp comes in is that they deliver you licensed therapists exactly where you are, online, remotely, so it can be anywhere in the world. They can get you a therapist, and it's entirely around your schedule, morning, afternoon, night, whatever's best for you. You can go there. How it works is you fill out this questionnaire, and then they're going to match you with one of their licensed therapists. And if you don't click with them the first time, it's no big deal. You can just redo the process and get another therapist until you find the right one for you with no additional charge. But the convenience factor of being entirely suited around your schedule is a big deal. So you can go reap the benefits of therapy. So let gratitude flow through you in the season of thanks at betterhelp.com/LockedOnNBA today. 10% off your first month. BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. We're back on Locked On NBA Game Night, recapping the Saturday slate of NBA action, the 4 games that were on tap in the association. I'm Rylan Stiles, host of Locked On Thunder. That's Jackson Gatlin, host of Locked On Rockets. And Jackson, one of the more exciting finishes and one of the more interesting outcomes at the end was Atlanta against Chicago. It was a very fascinating come-from-behind game. We'll take you to Atlanta to see the recap of that one.
Hello, friends. This is Brad Rowland, the host of the Locked On Hawks podcast, and the Hawks blow a 17-point second-half lead and lose to the Bulls on this Saturday evening. It was the 5th game in 7 nights for Atlanta, and certainly it felt that way at the end of this game. To a man after the game, Trae Young, Quinn Snyder, Clint Capella, everybody that talked after the game acknowledged the fact that they were pretty much gassed in this one. And while it does not excuse everything for Atlanta, it certainly looked to be that as kind of a big factor down the stretch of this game. Atlanta's offense went very, very quiet. They had a 54 offensive rating in the fourth quarter that might led to 15 points and a 20-point swing in favor of the Bulls. From here, the Hawks do have 2 days off for the first time all season in between games, but now they go to Boston on the road on Tuesday for the most difficult test in the entire league, a road game against the defending champs. In the meantime, they are now 4-7 and battling all kinds of rotational issues when it comes to their injury situation. We'll get into all of that and much more, of course, on the Locked On Hawks podcast.
So you heard it there, the blown lead and the brutal schedule, just a grueling schedule in terms of rest and rest disadvantages. But these are two teams in really similar boats. Only a half game separates them in the standings, and two teams who you can make a solid case for trying again, just re-rolling that rebuild button and seeing if you can make something happen with your roster, whether that's tanking in this specific draft class, which is so good, or for the Hawks, a more long-term, bigger picture question about Trae Young's future with the franchise. So both these teams have a lot to deal with. In today's game, I thought that Chicago kind of showed you what they're capable of, which we've known from them. Like, we know that the last few years they've been able to bust their way into the play-in tournament and not much more in the lowly Eastern Conference. But this team is a little different. Like, you've injected some life into it with the way that Zach LaVine is playing, with the way that Josh Giddey has hit the ground running in Chicago with the guard whisperer Billy Donovan. Short-term, Jackson, and then we'll talk big picture, who would you rather be for this season?
I think I'd rather be this season in particular. I think I'd rather be the Atlanta Hawks. Look, right now the Hawks Brad alluded to it, right? The 5 games, 7 nights, that's a brutal schedule. I think at one point on the broadcast, they mentioned it's actually like something like 9 games in 14 days or something like this, or something ridiculous. I don't know. It was some kind of, they've had a just absolutely grueling start to the season. You couple that with the injuries that they're dealing with up and down the roster. They're still missing so many key contributors for their team. And the fact that they were still, in this game, they were up, right? And then they just completely ran out of gas there in the second half. I'm going Hawks for this season. I think you still have a legit bona fide star in Trae Young. I think people have been a little down on Trae ever since the Hawks had that kind of Cinderella run to the Eastern Conference Finals, and they really haven't been able to make a push to go back to that point. But I think they went all in with the wrong trade, right? When they tried to go Trae Young, DeJounte Murray, right? They tried to find the right backcourt partner for Trae Young. And I never really bought into that being the right fit for him, as a complimentary backcourt partner. What I do love, though, is what they turned DeJounte Murray into. Dyson Daniels is incredible. I am so high on Dyson Daniels, and he looks like exactly what you want in a backcourt partner next to Trae Young. His ability, he is going to be on an all-defensive team this year. I feel incredibly comfortable in saying that at this point. Over these last 2 games, he has 13 steals over the last 2 games. That's unbelievable, Rylan.
It is, and I think that Atlanta is going to figure things out. I think both these teams make the play-in for the Eastern Conference, which isn't saying a ton because of the way those standings are right now in the East. But for this season, it would depend what your goals are. I guess if you're looking at this from a watchability standpoint, I'd probably actually say Chicago because they just have so many more guys to watch. Like, I'm very fascinated with Josh Giddey. I love watching DeSumo play. I think that LaVine is really fun. Vucevic down low. Patrick Williams, like, you can go on and on. I mean, I don't know what they're going to do with Buzelis. I wonder.
You know what? I'm just angry. I'm angry at Billy Donovan for not playing Buzelis. That's my problem. I thought he was my dark horse for Rookie of the Year. Watching him play in Summer League, I was so excited about his game. I really loved him coming out of the draft. And then, what's happening in Chicago? Why can't he get any run? So maybe that's why I'm a little bit more down on the Bulls at this point.
Yeah, and I wonder if he'll be headed to the Windy City Bulls. Like, while he did play in the G League last year, he played in one of the biggest monstrosities and biggest disasters of any professional or assembled group of sports players this side of Bishop Sycamore. Like, it was just awful. The Ignite was. So getting some more structure could help his development, and they think that maybe slowing him down would help. But for both these teams, which we're going to talk about in the bigger picture, I wish that they would just pick a direction of what you're trying to do, because in my opinion, it's a fruitless exercise that we know these teams bottom out or their ceiling is being in the play-in tournament and perhaps making your way to the 7 seed or 8 seed and getting swept or gentlemen swept in the first round. I'd rather see them take a direction, but who I'd rather be short-term? I think I'd rather be Chicago because you just have more flexibility with the amount of people that you have. Like, I still think Buzelis can be special. I really like Kobe White. I really like Patrick Williams. And then you still have that piece, if you want to call him a trade chip, of Zach LaVine. And then you've signed Jalen Smith, who's been good. Julian Phillips has been good from Tennessee. Like I would just say probably Chicago in the short term, but in the long term, at least my answer is different. Who would you rather be long term between these two franchises?
Really quickly, just on the Chicago angle, right? I kind of thought they had picked a direction, right? They held on to that core for so long, and then they finally decided, okay, hey, we're going to facilitate, we're going to offload these guys this offseason, go get Josh Giddey, right? It looked like they were finally signaling, hey, okay, fine, we're done being on the treadmill of mediocrity. We're going to fire sale all these, veteran pieces, these older guys, even if we're only getting, 75 cents on the dollar as far as their value is concerned. We're finally going to pick a direction. We're going to go full-blown youth movement, and this will be our chance to actually reset. And then they haven't done that yet. Like it really thought this offseason that's what everything was signaling in Chicago. And then they just decided not to. And they're still trotting out, right? They're still going to be kind of a middling, like 500-ish team, kind of flirting with the play-in a little bit. And maybe make the argument that's good for the development of some of these younger guys. But at the same time, again, when you've got guys that are as talented as Buzelis just rotting away on the bench, like these guys need to play, right? So either send him down to the Windy City and let him get the G League run down there, or actually play him and get him substantial minutes here playing against NBA competition. I'm still going to go Atlanta long-term, Rylan. Like I know that Trae Young has been involved in so many rumors the last few years. Will he, won't he get traded to the Lakers in some capacity or whatever? Like it's got to be frustrating if you're a Hawks fan, but at the end of the day, Trae Young is still one of the best players in the association. Again, I think people are a little bit down on him. He is one of the more like heliocentric kind of offensive players in the league. But there's very few guys that can do what he does on a night in, night out basis, being able to elevate his team, especially on the offensive end. So it's just about finding the right pieces and putting the right pieces around them. But when you look up and down the roster, right, they've got Jalen Johnson, they've got Zachary Reese-Shea, they've got Dyson Daniels, they've got a lot of really young, exciting talent to kind of build on and move forward with. So I don't think of it necessarily as the Hawks like doing like another rebuild or having to rebuild again. It's more like a restructuring, a retooling around Trae Young, if you will.
Yeah, and so my long-term answer actually does flip over to Atlanta because you what you said is right about what they have internally. I'm a big Jalen Johnson fan, a big Dyson Daniels fan. I'm also still an Onyeka Okongwu believer, but I don't think that the Hawks are anymore. But nonetheless, I pick them because they have their options open. You mentioned it that Trae Young, for all the discourse, is still one of the best players in the NBA. And I firmly believe that, one, you can build around him. So if they want to take the route of, you look at this 25 draft class, which I'm a huge fan of, they're owed the Lakers pick, they're owed the Sacramento Kings pick, and they do owe their own pick to San Antonio. But would it surprise you at all if either the Kings or the Lakers found themselves in the Western Conference play-in tournament and then somehow got beat in that tournament and did not make the postseason? Therefore, you get 2 lottery picks and an exceptionally deep draft class to add to your team of really talented young players next to Trae Young. It wouldn't surprise me at all. And so you can go that route. Or if you do decide, yeah, Trae's a great player, but this is going to take way too long, we're 2 ships passing in the night, you're going to get set up, I think, for a much better future than what the Bulls have, which is you're going to have to extend Josh Giddey and figure out what a proper number is, which is a really dicey game. Because of how he's playing right now, that offseason contract, you could look back on in a couple of years and say it was either a bargain or it's an albatross. So I wouldn't want to be in that boat of deciding on Josh Giddey's contract. And then your only big trade chip left is Zach LaVine, who at this point in his career is going to net you pennies on the dollar in terms of what it actually does to help you get on the other side of a rebuild. So long term, I'd much rather be Atlanta because I think that they can do both. They can either build around what they have or just start over. Chicago, I don't think they can do either right now. I think that a long-term rebuild will go much longer than Atlanta's, and a short-term rebuild, you just don't have that star power, which is what you need in the playoffs, like a Trae Young.
That's what happens when you're stuck in that middling class of NBA team. You are stuck picking in that 8 to 14-ish range every single year. You miss out on all the top end prospects every single season. And that's not to say that the Bulls don't have some young, exciting talent. They absolutely do, but they don't have a young, like true cornerstone piece. And that's the problem. At least as it stands right now, the Hawks literally just drafted Zachary Reese-Shea #1 overall. That's a big get for them. And who knows what Reese-Shea ultimately becomes as a player. He's off to a really strong start his rookie campaign, and he slots in perfectly next to their, existing star in Trae Young. So, and it's not like Trae is some like over the hill 30-year-old or something either. He's still incredibly young, right? There's plenty of time for the Hawks to still double down on Trae Young, being able to win with him at the highest level and putting the right pieces around him. And again, to your point, they've got the assets to actually make it happen as well.
Yeah, and you've seen with Trae Young that if you get the proper breaks, you can go on a deep playoff run. And that's what every team needs. I mean, you look at the Mavericks last year, and every team who's ever made a deep run, it takes some breaks, but you've got to be able to capitalize on those breaks with stars like Trae Young. Coming up, are the Spurs spunky and fun this season, even with this game against Utah? And can James Harden continue to climb with the Clippers? But first, I want to say right now, but our good friends over at FanDuel, go check out FanDuel today because FanDuel is America's #1 sports book. You can bet $5 right now as a new customer and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. Go to the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It gives you everything you need to place a live bet on the NFL today, all in one place, or you can do it in the middle of the game, before a game. You can even bet on stuff in the future, like who will win NBA MVP, by going to FanDuel.com. And of course, if you're a new customer, you place that $5 bet, you'll get $150 in bonus bets if you win that bet. And you can even bet on the NBA slate on Wednesday. The Oklahoma City Thunder hosting the Golden State Warriors will be a primetime slot for NBA game nights tomorrow. The Thunder 7.5-point favorites at home over the Warriors. Go check it out today at FanDuel. We're back on the Locked On NBA Game Nights podcast. I'm your host, Rylan Stiles. Joining me is Jackson Gatlin, host of Locked On Rockets. I host Locked On Thunder. Jackson, thank you for hopping on the Saturday edition of Locked On NBA Game Nights. You can hear Jackson all throughout the week on this very feed as well. You can hear me every Saturday. And our next game takes us out to the Utah San Antonio game, which was a very, very sicko but fun game. So you heard it from David Locke there. The Utah Jazz get a nail-biting win over the San Antonio Spurs. But Jackson, let's start with the Spurs side of things. Even though they lost, I'm just going to ask it simply. Are the Spurs fun?
Yes, they are. But I'm so far to this point, I've been pretty disappointed with CP3 in a Spurs uniform. I was expecting, I guess, a lot more from CP3. And I don't know if it's just, I don't know what these conversations are like between him and Greg Popovich, which, as a quick aside, hope everything's going okay with Greg Popovich, right? The health concerns there. Obviously, one of the best to ever do it when it comes to, coaching and basketball and everything. But just look, I was expecting Chris Paul to really help further unlock Wemby and the rest of this young Spurs roster. And not to say that he's not doing his job, right? He is, facilitating, he's putting guys in the right spots to be successful, but he seems so incredibly passive. And that's just such a weird thing to see. We've seen Chris Paul in, I don't know how many different stops where he's taken young star players under his tutelage, right? Did it in Phoenix with Devin Booker, did it in OKC with SGA. I don't want to say he didn't really do it in Houston per se, but right, James Harden, in the mix of his, MVP campaign, right, being Batman to his, or Robin to his Batman, whatever. We've seen him elevate so many different teams, and I feel like he's just been incredibly passive through this early part of the season. And some of that might be by design, though. That's the other part, is at the end of this game, right, seeing Stephon Castle be afforded the chances to make the plays down the line, right? To have the ball in his hands, to be the decision maker. Some of that might just be by design, where Chris Paul is kind of the training wheels out there, if you will. And he's willing, and the coaching staff wants him to take a step back and allow the young guys to kind of flourish on their own merit. But at the end of the day, like, again, I kind of just wish that we would see, I don't know, I thought we were going to be seeing like Chris Paul, Victor Wembanyama lobs like every other possession, and we just haven't seen that so far. They are fun, but I've been a little disappointed with Chris Paul so far.
Yeah, I've been sorely disappointed with Chris Paul as a scorer, and I think that that's what the Spurs need. I think that he's done a good job setting the table, but who are you setting the table to? They just got Devin Vassell back, who's been good. Keldon Johnson had a really good game today, but none of these guys can really stroke it from beyond the arc, to where you're seeing a lot of times this passiveness by Chris Paul not really being rewarded for anything. I mean, he had 9 assists tonight, but he has a billion potential assists that guys just cannot cash in on. Julian Champagnie went 1 for 6 today from 3. And I would just like to see him take over that scoring role, because I think that the Spurs would have, and I don't know if they've, kind of buried themselves. We'll kind of see how the rest of the season plays out. They're right now 4-6, so they're still right in the mix. I think that the Spurs could have been a team, and still can be a team that kind of just backs into something similar to that first run from Oklahoma City, where they just stumbled into that play-in run, where people forget now that the only reason that team got to go win a play-in game in New Orleans and almost beat the Minnesota Timberwolves was because the Dallas Mavericks waved the white flag the final 2 games of the year and said, no, you take it. We don't want to be here. We don't want to be in this play-in tournament. We want our pick instead. And when you see the run of injuries that you're from New Orleans and from other teams, you could be heading down a similar path where, yeah, those teams are better than you. Like New Orleans is better than San Antonio, but they might not want it as bad as you want it. And for San Antonio, whenever you have the benefit of picks coming from other places, I'd just rather you see and maximize on what Chris Paul can do for you as a scorer. But perhaps you're exactly right in that behind the scenes, they understand how good this draft class is. They understand how the landscape looks for them in terms of their ceiling this year. They'd rather use Chris Paul as a vessel to get these other guys opportunities down the stretch, where he can teach them now. For example, Castle today, he can teach him now in the film room tomorrow. Here's what you did. Here's what you should have done. Here's what you saw. Here's what you should have seen, and do it that way, where it's not as apparent as what he did with Shea, what he did with Booker. But I just would prefer to see him take on more of a scoring lead. But I would still categorize the Spurs as fun, because I love watching Castle defend, and that offense has been coming around. This was his, of course, best game in terms of box score rewards, where you're shooting 50% from the floor to the tune of 23 points. But I just love watching him come into his own. Victor is a guy you just cannot take your eyes off of, no matter if it's a bad game, which there are few, and great games, which there are many. And then I still like Harrison Barnes. Maybe that's just the Mavericks Tar Heels in me, but still like him. And then Devin Vassell coming back, I think, is huge. I understand you want to, use him in a training wheel situation right now, fresh off of an injury. But as you get further away from that injury, I think that he can provide a huge boost in terms of the connectivity of this team offensively, and we know what he is defensively.
Look, man, talking about this team being fun, right? There was that possession late in the game where Wemby had like 2 blocks on the same possession, to get like game-saving blocks of his, what do you have, 7 in this game? Like, yes, this team is incredibly fun. They have so many different, I want to say, weapons defensively, right? Stephon Castle, such a great point of attack defender. Wemby getting it done on the inside as he does. It's just about, for them, right? If they are going to fall backwards into something or whatever, it's going to be, how does this team grow and develop on the offensive side of the ball? They do have some question marks there. Not a lot of shooting, as you've already alluded to. And honestly, I really think that Chris Paul being in San Antonio, right? I'm sure he has some kind of like a wink, nudge agreement where down the line, they're either going to trade him to his preferred destination, whoever he thinks he has the best shot of winning a title with, or they're just going to outright waive him and let him go sign a vet minimum with whatever team he thinks he can ride with to win a title this season. So again, Chris Paul's kind of just on babysitter duty for probably about half a season, and then he's going to go join a contender later this year.
Yeah, I think that that's the route that things are heading for sure. And with the Jazz, I would put them in the interesting category, and you would say, what's the differential between interesting and exciting? I'm not necessarily excited about watching the Jazz every single night, but I do get interested in seeing what they've done with this roster. So last year, the 24 class was just beat to the ground. This time last year, all throughout the draft cycle, if it's not any good, if you're in the draft, you should sell out of the draft. It's just terrible. And the Jazz went the other way of, we're actually going to load up on all these guys who, like, in high school, you thought they were going to be good, like Cody Williams, like Kyle Filipowski, like Isaiah Collier. And yeah, they might have had disappointing college seasons for one reason or another, injuries or whatever. We're just going to load up on them and see if any of them hit. So I do get curious watching Cody Williams, who's really struggled this season, and Isaiah Collier and Kyle Filipowski, and the Walker Kessler thing, who it felt he was all but gone, but now he's starting for them and playing really well for them. What does that future behold? Plus, we know about Lauri Markkanen. He's kind of a known commodity. And Colin Sexton just makes you want to go run through a wall. Like watching him play makes you feel like you can do whatever you want to do in life.
He's just an Energizer bunny. Like Colin Sexton is electric. Watching him out there doing what he does. Honestly, my thing was of all the bigs this past draft, when I was doing some pre-draft evaluation stuff, I really liked Kyle Filipowski. Like I looked at him and I was like, man, this kid has something. And then there was like the off the court stuff, and so
it's right in Utah.
I don't know what he's ultimately going to become as a player, but of like the young players that the Jazz all just picked up this past draft cycle, I think I'm highest on him individually.
And then the final game of the night, which might have been the nearest and dearest to your heart, was the Clippers getting their fourth straight win, 105-103 over a fun Toronto Raptors team. Fun is the name of the day today. Grady Dick is playing huge in this season, and I just love Jonathan Mogbo. He got 9 minutes today. Didn't do a whole lot in the box score, but I just love watching him play. Jamal Shed, another guy who's been really good from that 24 class. But with the Clippers, 4 straight wins. You know more than anybody what James Harden can do as a regular season riser. And while it wasn't the most sexy box score because he only shot 29% from the floor, he still really helped this Clippers team win. What do you make of what James Harden can do for the Clippers when you look around and see, okay, New Orleans could be down for the count with the injuries that they're piling up here, and you imagine the losses that will follow suit? It's not as though there's been many teams who've been world beaters. Everybody's kind of all conjured up past the top 3. What do you make of what Harden can do to steady things, and if/when Kawhi returns, where the Clippers could be at?
I think it's tough because you're like, first off, James Harden is one of the most elite floor raisers in the NBA. He hasn't ever missed the playoffs. He's had this ability throughout his career to drag even the most suboptimal teams to like 50 plus wins. Now, this is also a completely different version of James Harden, right? This is a much older version of James Harden. He doesn't have nearly the explosiveness or the burst that he had earlier in his career. He's relying a lot more now on his craft, his, at times his foul baiting tactics, or even just his sheer strength, right? He's overpowering a lot of guys now. Rather than relying on the first step on drives, he'll just get his shoulders past you, and then just it almost looks like he's driving like in slow motion at times, and it doesn't matter because he's just so skilled that he's still able to kind of manipulate the defense and get what he wants. At the end of the day, my issue with this Clippers team is, as long as they still have other guys that are able to, I guess, capitalize on the opportunities that Harden's going to generate, because even though Harden's clearly slowed down and he's not the same Harden that he was in Houston or even Brooklyn or whatever, he's slowed down considerably. He's still great at manipulating defenses, and he's still putting guys like Zubac, guys like Norm Powell in fantastic positions to score the basketball. So it's ultimately up to those guys to be able to deliver. And I mean, Norm Powell's off to an incredible start this season. I mean, he's been scoring the lights out of the ball. Zubac has had a great, strong start to his year. So these guys are stepping up, right? There are more opportunities on the table with no Kawhi Leonard. The Clippers even trying to right now rehabilitate Kevin Porter Jr., whether they should be or shouldn't be. That's a conversation for another day, but they're making use of the talent they do have access to up and down the roster. And I think that for the Clippers, they're going to be kind of in the mix, but they have such a razor thin margin for error. Like you see, they're in a dogfight with the Raptors. Like that's kind of how this Clippers team is going to go. And they're going to be in, I think, a lot of these games, right? We saw them going toe to toe with the Suns earlier this season. They're going to be in a lot of these games. They're not just going to walk out there and be like an easy out or an easy blowout W or anything. That's not going to happen. It's just, they're not going to have like the heavy hitting, hard hitting nights where they have multiple star players who can all pool together and get you these easy wins. It's going to be tough, grinded out wins every night for this Clippers squad.
Yeah, it's a lot like asking Picasso to paint with red sauce. I mean, could he do it? Sure. Will he be successful? I don't know, because I just don't see who he's raising the floor of, and it's not his own detriment. I think he's putting these guys, Norman Powell, Derek Jones Jr., Zubac, I think he's putting these guys in really good spots. But who is there that you can consistently count on to capitalize on the gravity and the benefit and the setup that Harden gives you night in and night out? I know that they've all had their moments this year. Obviously, they've won 4 straight and they don't have an abysmal record. But consistently throughout an 82-game season, and you really have to think of it that way, given we don't really know anything about Kawhi right now, and we know what his track record shows once we get to this ambiguous part of his injury there's really no turning back. How long can this sustain for? Jackson, to end the show, if you had to bet a significant sum at FanDuel, what would be your seed for the Clippers?
11 seed. I don't think they make it.
Ooh, an 11 seed is tough. I mean, that would be pretty brutal for everyone outside of Oklahoma City. It would be great for the people of Oklahoma, awful for the people of LA, much like something else. But Jackson, thank you so much for joining us today on Locked On NBA Game Nights. And until tomorrow, whenever they're going to recap the entire Sunday slate, be good and be good to one another.